ahead and move on to our regular agenda now, starting with item 3, our Flood Zone 9 verbal report. I believe this is coming from Liz Lewis.
Good evening, Mayor Feineman and council members. I have a brief presentation and update. Let's see, I'll just go ahead and pull up the presentation. Okay, so just wanted to kind of provide a quick recap of where we are with the Ross Valley watershed and flood risk reduction project plan, work plan through 2027. So the phase 1 of the Port of Madera Creek flood risk management project contract was awarded for construction of a pump station in Kentfield and an access ramp into the concrete channel there in Kentfield, and construction is expected to start later this summer. As most of you are well aware, to the San Anselmo flood risk reduction project, construction is underway for the basin up there at 3000 Francis Drake Boulevard. That work of the stormwater basin is scheduled to be completed in the next couple of months, and then that basin will be online this winter. All of these projects are really targeting reduction of flood risk during the 10 to 25 year event. The Zone 9 and through the stormwater fee that residents pay into the Ross Valley program that continues to support creek maintenance from Larkspur to Fairfax. There's also some work that's being done to sort of summarize this geomorphic design basis work that was presented about a year or 2 ago to our Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board, and so looking at applications to lower Port of Madera Creek there below the concrete channel. The Hillview pump station funding was provided to Larkspur, and the pump station and that drainage work has largely been completed, and they're just looking to connect some of the storm drain pipes in the Hillview neighborhood to the pump station this winter. Then, of course, the work to replace bridges continues, and so a bit more on that next. So as we approach the bridge replacement work, looking at it through the lens of the FEMA no-rise requirement, and this is no rise within the FEMA regulatory floodway. I won't take a lot of time on this, but briefly, the town of San Anselmo is unique in that it has mapped 2 FEMA regulatory floodways. So there's one along San Anselmo Creek and then one along San Anselmo Avenue. I've included a definition here. It's basically this regulatory floodway is something that the federal government, through their National Flood Insurance Program, has this area defined. So it's a channel of a river or other water course of adjacent land areas that must be reserved in order to discharge the base flood without increasing the water surface elevation more than a designated height. And so there's a diagram that FEMA has included there that you can see sort of kind of describing or showing the physical extent of the floodway area, which they regulate in addition to the 100-year floodplain that they regulate. And so this designation prevents development from occurring in the floodplain or the floodway that would increase flood heights upstream. So whenever a project is proposed within one of these regulatory floodways, FEMA has guidance on what steps the projects must take and what sort of hydraulic analysis must be performed. In essence, FEMA dictates that there can be no rise greater than 0.00 feet. So this no rise analysis that would result in what they call a no rise certification has to be performed by a qualified registered engineer. And so I'll move along, bringing this up in regards to the San Anselmo project, because in addition to the basin upstream in Fairfax, that work was paired with removal of Building Bridge 2 in downtown Creek Park. So removal of building bridge 2 does cause a rise of greater than 0.00 feet. So in looking at that, and I'm going to go through a couple of options. This is an informational meeting only. In looking at the different options, in order to not create a rise of greater than 0.00 feet, the other option is to conduct flood mitigation downstream. So I'll get to that in a minute. The removal of the building bridge 2, which is an 80+ year old bridge in downtown San Anselmo, lowers the floodwater elevation upstream for about 200 property owners. But there are potentially up to 20 properties downstream that do see a rise potentially to a structure. So that's part of the different options that we'll be looking at tonight. This graphic is if we were standing in the creek channel and we were looking upstream, we'd be looking, so we were standing, say, at the pedestrian park below the Creekside Pizza, we'd be looking upstream. San Anselmo is there on the left of the screen, and then on the right side would be Creekside Park. And so the project would, the removal of the building bridge 2, would remove the existing building bridge, would stabilize both banks, the bank along San Anselmo Avenue as well as the bank along Creek Park. And then in doing this, in order to ensure the no rise, there's a structure that's being proposed within the regulatory floodway, and that's highlighted in the light green here. I know it's not that easy to see, so I'll make sure I'm going to send this presentation to the town so it can be posted and shared. But essentially, there's a concrete structure. The engineers refer to it as a baffle. The concrete structure would be reconstructed as part of the San Anselmo Creek restoration to remove the 80-year-old plus bridge and restore and stabilize the creek banks with rock and native vegetation. And then as part of that, this concrete baffle is sort of a small bridge that will be incorporated into the existing structures that are there, or if the reimagined Creek Park moves forward, our engineers have been working carefully with our HAA, so there's a pedestrian bridge that's proposed to be constructed above the 100-year flood elevation. So this baffle structure would essentially act to keep the water surface elevation the same during a 100-year flow. So there would be no change upstream or downstream. So the cost of this, the total cost of the project is $4.2 million. The cost to construct this baffle is $200,000. And so the construction of that baffle is considered a temporary measure until mitigation could be performed either upstream or downstream. So this slide, I'll walk you through sort of the different options that have been, presented here and have also been, discussed in some detail with the Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board. So the present option that we have presented to the Flood Zone 9 Advisory Board back in April is the removal of the building bridge, stabilizing the creek banks, installing a baffle, and planting native trees. And so each one of these options looks at the compliance, its ability to comply with the FEMA no rise of greater than 0.00 feet, the timeline for construction, when it's expected, whether CEQA has been completed or whether it would be needed, whether there's a flood benefit, it's a simple yes or no, estimated cost, if we have the cost. And then it looks at the challenges as well as the benefits. And so with removal of the building bridge 2, we've talked some about that. We have an engineer's estimate of $4.2 million. As we know, the challenge is there would be no immediate flood benefit, but it does set the stage for future flood mitigation, and combined by removing the 80-year-old building bridge. Daylight's, 100 and so feet of creek that's shared by Steelhead and other.
Excuse me, Liz, this is
Yeah.
Councilmember Colbert. Just to interrupt, Mayor Feynman, I just been notified that the public cannot see the slides. Is there any way you can verify that? I'm not in a position to know if this is a local technical problem, but I know there's community interest on this. Just to bring that to everyone's attention. I don't know if it's possible to double check Mayor Feynman or David. Pardon the interruption, Liz, but people want to see.
Sure, no problem.
Do we know if these people are watching on Marin, the Community Meeting Center, or on Zoom?
Fair question, David. Let me find out again. I apologize, but the public is interested.
And I'll go run and talk to the media center.
I can.
Maybe ask one of the attendees if they can see it.
Eileen just shared that someone reached out to her saying that folks who are on Zoom can see the slides.
Okay. Hey, look, it might just be a one-off. Anyway, I don't want to completely derail things, Mayor Feynman. So.
You know what? Let's just pause for 30 seconds. Robin is checking with Marin TV and see if any additional information emerges. And if not, then I think we should proceed.
Excellent call, Mayor Feynman. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your patience, and I apologize.
Okay, Mayor, is it okay to continue?
Liz, I think it's okay for you to continue. Our Marin TV representative isn't sure and doesn't have any immediate solutions. So if you are watching from TV, I would encourage you to head to the town website where you can find links to the agendas, and then you should be able to join via Zoom or call in via phone, although you won't be able to see the slides from calling in. Thank you. And with that, Liz, if you can pick up, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So, thank you, Mayor Feynman. I'll go through this slide again since it's presenting 4 options for complying with FEMA's no-rise regulations, which require no rise of greater than 0.00 feet within a regulatory floodway. And so with this project, the removal of the building bridge 2 is considered quote unquote a development under FEMA's regulations, even though it is removal of an 80-year-old building bridge that obstructs flow upstream. But the removal of that bridge does cause a rise downstream, and that potentially impacts up to 20 properties. So this slide is walking through 4 different options here for, just for discussion purposes this evening. So the first one is sort of the project that was scoped initially through the project DIR back in 2018, and so that's the removal of the building bridge 2, includes the stabilizing of both banks, San Anselmo Avenue and the Parkside, installing a concrete baffle structure that would maintain the 100-year water surface elevation in San Anselmo Creek and along San Anselmo Avenue. And then on the left-hand side, there are different categories comparing each of these different scenarios as to whether they meet the FEMA no rise, what the proposed timeline is, whether SEQ was completed or more CEQA analysis is needed, and that's the California Environmental Quality Act, whether the scenario provides a flood benefit to the town of San Anselmo or not, its relative or projected cost, the challenges, and then other benefits. So as I mentioned with the initial project that's been proposed to remove Building Bridge 2, the engineer's estimate for that is $4.2 million. I'll go through a timeline for this first scenario in just a minute. As we've discussed, there's no immediate flood benefit, but it does set the stage for future flood mitigation with the removal of that 80-year-old building bridge. It daylights the creek, and also as part of this process back during the pandemic, there was a relocation of 4 flood-prone businesses there, and so those buildings have been removed from the regulatory floodplain. The next option or scenario that's presented here would be for the building bridge to remain where it is, for the flood district to deed this property back to the town of San Anselmo, and along with that to provide 100% plan set for the future removal of building bridge 2. that timeline could occur as early as this year. CEQA would be required for that, and most of that may be already contained within the EIR that was approved for the project in 2018. If any additional work would be needed for any of these projects, an addendum to the EIR could be considered. There's no immediate flood benefit by transferring the property from the flood district to the town. The liability for the 80-year-old bridge would be transferred back to the town of San Anselmo. The property would be transferred in its existing condition. Along with that, one of the benefits would be that the town would have a shovel-ready project design for future funding if we could find ways to either mitigate the flood rise that's seen downstream or look at capturing some of that upstream through detention. Focusing first downstream, if we were looking at the removal of Building Bridge 2 and then looking at providing flood mitigation to the 20 landowners or so downstream, some of that survey work would need to continue, and we would need to really characterize what type of flood mitigation would need to happen to the structure, whether it's flood proofing of some type or elevating utilities, or if it's actual home elevation. Whatever flood mitigation is required, it would have to be conducted and completed prior to the demolition of Building Bridge 2. This is definitely going to require additional funding to supplement the Zone 9 funds. As we're all aware, the flood fee expires in 2027, and negotiating with up to 20 landowners could take through 2027. The FEMA requirements state that if the property owner is not able to agree to the mitigation that's offered, that eminent domain could be required if the homeowner refuses the mitigation that's offered, and so there has to be funding for that process as well as for the fair market value that would be offered. Benefits there are flood benefits. The building bridge is removed. It would daylight the creek. Obviously, the businesses have been relocated, and then their flood mitigation would be performed up on to 20 parcels, and it would allow the upstream property owners, the up to 200 plus property owners, would see the benefit of the removal of Building Bridge 2. And then lastly, just in order to mitigate the 100-year flow event through San Anselmo at that location, initially our engineers have identified about 270 acre-feet of upstream detention that would be required. That could be required or could be found or identified through public spaces that have been identified. A lot of these are parcels that have previously been the subject of very vigorous discussion and even been opposed by local voters, measures such as Memorial Park. If detention is not available through a public parcel, then the acquisition of private parcels, such as what was allowed, or the purchase of 3,000 Sir Francis Drake, so the conversion of the Sunnyside Nursery for stormwater storage is an opportunity. That also would cost additional funding, and then also eminent domain may be required, but this process does provide a flood benefit. The cost, I'm not showing them here today because they would have to be updated for the several basins that will be required, but it's just to kind of provide, this is another scenario that has been discussed extensively, but there has been little public support for that option, with the exception of the Sunnyside Basin. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the timeline for proceeding with the project that was analyzed as part of the San Anselmo Flood Risk Reduction EIR back in 2018. So we would move ahead with the project design, have the 100% design plans and specs for the building. As part of that, there has already been a submittal to FEMA to basically to go through the no rise certification. We've had extensive communication with FEMA staff and with